Mine is definitely a ginger.
Here's my ginger right here behind me.
Oh.
I used to have a ginger cat. I loved him very much.
My little one's name is Swithin because he was rescued on St. Swithin's Day.
Oh.
Now we all know the poem for St. Swithin's Day.
I actually don't.
I can't say that I do.
Yeah. Look it up. It's basically, if it rains on St. Swithin's Day, it'll rain for the next 40 days. So we know that's the day Noah set sail.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to keep an eye on the waiting room.
Okay.
And let's go get started. Thank you all for joining us. If you wish to be muted or have your camera on or off, it's okay either way. There will be time for question and answer, or we might just leap right into it, depending on how things go. My name is Sean Eustace. Marshall Garrett is the director for our King Lear in OP, opening October 1st and running through the 24th, which has been a wild ride as we reopen and actually get back to the Kestrel. And I'm just going to turn it right over.
All right, as I help a toddler open a Ziploc bag here real quick, and hope she doesn't choke on it. Yeah, so I'm Marshall. I am the director of Lear, as Sean said, and also a full-time parent, as you can all see. I was first involved with Baltimore Shakespeare Factory in 2017 when I assistant directed Midsummer, and then I directed The Tempest and Chase Maiden Cheapside. And then I had this one and didn't really have time for theater for a few years, but now I'm back, so I'm happy to see you all. Bar to the Bone has always been one of my favorite things about Baltimore Shakespeare Factory. And I have a few things that I want to talk about, but I can also open up for questions at any time. Just bellow, shout, wave, however you want to get my attention. Chat's fine. I'll have the chat open as well. So King Lear is so. I assume we all are relatively long-time BSF folk who are here today, possibly. I don't know.
I'm surprisingly new. My first OP production that I saw was Othello.
Okay. So you and I basically crossed the ships in the night, because Othello really was when I was on my way out. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, to Tom DeLeese, who's the founding artistic director of BSF. Tim Carroll is kind of the patron saint of BSF. He's a theater director, formerly at the Globe. Now he's at the Shaw Festival in Canada. And he's got a approach to the text that we refer to as Iambic Fundamentalism, which is where we are very strict about the iambics in the text. I'm also an adherent of that. But the reason I bring him up is because he and I had a conversation, Tim Carroll and I had a conversation in 2015 when, I was first starting out, and we were just talking about plays that I wanted to direct. I mentioned I'm really afraid to direct Hamlet and Lear, and he said, "Oh, you just got to get the shibboleth plays out of your way." And I loved that notion of shibboleth plays. So within a couple of years, I had directed Hamlet at one of my companies. Hi, Carrie Brady. And then was getting ready to do Lear with my company up here in Harford County when COVID hit. And so in the same way that COVID kind of knocked out the BSF production, it knocked out the production I was doing up here, albeit in a far different point in the process. So when Jess asked me to step in, I felt very ready to step in, even though it was pretty late in the process. Yes, you can have those. For those just joining us, small toddler, slight distraction, but she's adorable. Very near and dear to my heart is this idea that many of Shakespeare's plays were written and rewritten over the course of his career. Lear is unique in that world, in that we have two very distinct and equally quote unquote good versions of the play. So there's the quarto, which was printed in his lifetime, and then the folio, which was printed by his friends and business partners after he died. And you'll get different smart people telling you different things about how good and bad the various quartos and folios are. And most folks will, when they're creating productions, they will do some sort of conflation of the two. They'll pick the best parts of each one. And that's how most folks do Lear as well. But Lear is interesting in that he's really presenting the play in two quite different ways. There's a greater emphasis on Edgar in the quarto version, and the folio version has a much bleaker ending. It's not exactly happy in the quarto version either. I far preferred to do a cohesive cut that was taking one of the texts as its primary, and following that one all the way through. So for the purposes of this production, I picked the folio version, which is not what I tend to do. I tend to pick quarto versions of things because they feel closer to performance text. But there's something bold in how much the folio version utterly resists any sort of hope at the end of the play that I find really disturbing in an artistically exciting way. So I followed that one, and that's meant that if you're a big fan of King Lear, if you've seen multiple productions, there are certain things that you may always see. The prime example that might come to mind is Lear kind of puts Goneril on trial, but he does it to a stool while he's mad, and that's not in the folio, so that's not in our production. And I had this extended conversation with David Yezi, who plays Lear and who was Lear in the previous pass through, and that scene was in our last production of it. And I asked him, "Are you going to be okay if we don't do it?" And he's like, "Yeah, actually, it kind of interrupts my flow of the character, so I actually would prefer to cut it." And I was like, "Great, we're in agreement. Let's cut it." So that's one of the first things that I just wanted to, I guess, put out there as a conversation starter, or as something that is kind of central in my thinking about the play, is wrestling with the instability of the text, wrestling with the fact that there are multiple versions of the play, and choosing to do a specific version rather than a conflated version. And I'm so sorry about the distraction here. But
it's not a problem.
You need some more. Yes, you get some more. I have now completely lost my train of thought. So if anybody has anything that they either want to ask about or talk about, or pet things that they love about Lear, I'd love for this to be more conversational than presentational.
No, this is perfectly fine. As this is likely to replace the pre-show on Saturdays. So we just you just finished with choosing the folio versus the quattro instead of like conflating the two.
Right.
which is, it's a choice. And that way you can like stick to one, and you know where your sources are, and you know the time what it was written and what he might have been thinking during that.
Yeah. Well,
I
and
guess,
there's also like there's honestly some arrogance in doing a conflation, because Shakespeare created two really distinct plays that happen to have the same characters and the same title. And so if we're doing a conflation, we're saying that we don't trust either version of the play that Shakespeare wrote. So we're going to make our own, splicing together pieces of his. Whereas I think doing a conflation, or sorry, a non-conflated, choosing a distinct source text honors Shakespeare's dramaturgy, Shakespeare's structuring of the play, especially in an instance like this where he has dramatically restructured the play in the two versions. And I don't think I'm smarter than Shakespeare, so I just looked at his two versions and I was like, which one of these is speaking to me, and which one of these feels like it's appropriate to the moment. And that reminds me actually of the other thing I did want to kind of start us off with, which is that if you're plugged into Shakespearea, as I imagine all of you quite are, there's been a lot of talk over the last year of this play being written during a plague, right? And written during a 2-year closure of the theaters. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's not about a plague. It doesn't front the idea of plague, but it does front, I guess, some ideas of inevitability and of being stuck in and kind of growing to hate your family and things like that. But I think we can.
You don't need a plague for that. I mean, that just comes.
I hope not. I hope not. But yeah, so yeah, go ahead, Sean.
So one of the other things that I read recently was an analysis of, okay, yes, so we had the theater closures during the plague. That was in Shakespeare time, and he went out into the country and wrote this. But then when people came back and they reopened the theaters, and here's another parallel that I don't know that people might have researched or even come upon. They had, like we have our case rates, they had their own version of a case rate where it was as long as there wasn't 30 deaths that week, they would stay open. And there was actually a phrase where in one of the other plays, I think it was either Kidd or Middleton, and one of the playwrights in the play says, well, it's like if you have the 40-day closure, and we are at 40, and so the theaters will be closed. And it's like, that's kind of, it's, we're just talking about case rates and not even looking at that, and we're trying to be safe as possible, wearing masks, requiring vaccines, etc. But they had their own trying to deal with the plague and just going, okay, well, if it's too much, if there's too many people dying, yeah, we're not having it, and the people who manage the laws about theaters will close us. And that was just an interesting parallel with a different metric, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling that.
Not to mention all the other plays that have mentions of what the plague would do, i.e. Romeo and Juliet, when he has the friar delivering the letter has to hold it back. Or is there another one besides Romeo and Juliet where the plague actually affects the plot?
There's some plague in Measure for Measure. Doesn't strongly affect the plot.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get up my list now because I'm sure there are.
So yeah, it wasn't a thing that they ignored. It was, but it's not mentioned in Lear, but it was definitely not a thing they ignored. And it definitely happens in other plays too. So.
Yeah, there's the omnipresence of potential, death and plague traveling through the playhouses, and I think also much like now, or maybe somewhat differently because of modern perspectives and whatnot, but the idea of, well, in the city we're going to close down the theater, because of plague, but out in the country they don't care. So we'll take our plague selves out in the country and we'll do a show out there, and we'll bring our plague over there because they're not worried about it. That's a London problem.
It's also interesting because you had all of the indoor theaters were still closed, but a lot of outdoor performances started happening first. So
right.
I think that's actually really awesome. I'm glad people are adapting. I'm hoping I don't hear of any theater cases actually happening. So fingers crossed.
Likewise.
So far, so
I've not
good.
heard of any theater mass spreader events.
Yeah, people are doing their best. Unless anybody else has a question or another topic they'd like to launch on, I actually have an idea.
Sure.
So I will go for it. So Baltimore Shakespeare Factory is one, like, the theater that does one original pronunciation production per year when we can. And having seen and participated in them, I have my own experiences. Is this your first time directing original pronunciation, and how has that affected the way that you approach it, or the style, or the process for you?
This is not only my first time directing OP, this is my first time experiencing it as anything other than an audience member. So I know Ben Crystal, and I not well, but well enough, and I've met David, and obviously I was admin at BSF during Othello, but that was also during my paternity leave. So, but it actually has been it's been absolutely delightful because I have the moments where I look at the page and I'm like, that should rhyme, but it doesn't. And then, we're going through it, and especially with the fool character in this one, even when our actor is going through it in the OP, they're still not hitting the it still doesn't rhyme, and so we have to stop. We don't have to stop like in the middle of the scene, but we do stop and we have the conversation. It's like, okay, clearly those rhyme, so now we get to learn something about OP because daughter and halter have to rhyme, right? Because this whole thing rhymes. So that and slaughter and laughter, there's a whole string of them right in a row that every word rhymes in OP, but none of them rhyme in contemporary pronunciation. And it's also been really great because I have known and respected Jess Bahar, who's the interim artistic director, for a while, but I've never worked with her before. And it can always be uncomfortable bringing in a guest director. It can be uncomfortable bringing somebody back who has left. It can be uncomfortable as the guest director working with a new artistic director. And it's pushed us into a collaboration that has been really, really nice. It's Jess and I are constantly talking not just about COVID numbers and can we fix the electricity in the costume room or whatever, and it's also hey, we need to get into this OP problem, and that's your wallet. It's not my wallet. So it's kept us mission focused. It's kept us play focused in our conversations, because anytime we're having any level of conversation about the play, there's always OPS, can we talk about this OP thing? Or let me start talking about this OP thing, and then let's also talk about this brass tacks thing. And so I don't know what Jess would say, but I've found it really helpful coming back to BSF after being away for a while, to have this thing that I'm super admiring of, and have no idea about, except that it's cool. And so to have to put that much trust in a collaborator that I've never worked with before is really kind of actually exciting. Which is not the it's not the I guess academic or we made this cool discovery through a OP answer, but it is something that I have found to be really beneficial about having this element to it in the production.
Yeah. One of the things that I found, and I think other actors will also tell you when dealing with original pronunciation, is you find whole new meanings when you pronounce the words differently, or they're sounding suddenly like some other word, and that just changes the entire sentence. And go ahead, Beth.
I have a question with OP pronunciation. Do you have access to understanding regional dialect in OP pronunciation? Because I'm sure that the Londoners spoke totally different from the Manchester group, and depending on where you were in the aisle, they'd have a different regional accent.
So great that you asked this, because in King Lear we have a character, Edgar, who has to speak in 3 different accents that are written into the play. And that same actor, Jeff Miller, who all of you likely have seen on stage before, they also play King of France. So he's not only no, you cannot. He's not only King of France, but he's also Edgar, and then he's got to play a person from Dover, as Edgar playing a person from Dover, and then he's got to, as Edgar, play, poor Tom, the mad, the mad person. Yes, you can have that. And so Jeff and I are kind of negotiating through, like, what is honoring the OP work that first David and Ben, and then Paul Meyer, and then Tom and Jess and everybody who's done it. No, you cannot. Honoring all of that work while at the same time looking at the script and seeing that, rather than saying I'll at one point, I''LL, Shakespeare has literally written the word CHILL, right? He wants like a, and even as Jeff and I are working, it's like he says, chill, or chill, and I was like, no, I think that's aisle, so I think you need to say child. And it's negotiating what's on the page, what's the OP, what's going to help the audience have the first idea, even what he's saying. But yeah, Shakespeare does write in some of those dialects, and it becomes about knowing how to read, folio writing, read the OP in the folio writing, and then trusting that you are smart enough to translate when you're given the specific instance of Shakespeare having written in the dialect. But we didn't go so far as like separating out the Duke of Albany from the Duke of Cornwall from the Duke of Kent from, we didn't sort out all those dialects, since the OP is a dialect itself. We just followed when the folio text told us it was a different accent.
Yeah. And I think there's also, I don't know how far you went into when King Lear was written. Here's where we were with the dialect and language drift. And I'm pretty sure Jess has a good understanding of that. And she also made some definite choices for original pronunciation in this show. And one of the wondrous things about original pronunciation is that rather than having, one person doing received and one person doing northern and one person doing, some Cockney thing, but it's this balanced, leveled out, here's original pronunciation. So that's what you're speaking. And it kind of actually clears your accents. And it's really, once, like about, maybe for me, 5 to 10 seconds in, I'm already adjusted. I'm like, this is what things will sound like. And then the rest of the actors sounding like that as well. It just levels things out, and it really makes it understandable and really enjoyable to my mind.
Yeah, and it's been fun hearing, it really also brings out where people's individual resonators are. Because, for example, Rocky Nunzio, who's playing Edmund for us, is a really broad-shouldered guy. He has a lot of like resonators in his chest, and we're actually working on helping him, because OP brings the voice so far down in the body, but he sounds, because of all of his resonators, he sounds almost demonic when he's activating all of that. So now that he's learned it all, he actually has to move the resonators up towards his face so that it's not just like evil, 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 because that's not, you know, the Edmund he wants to play. That's not the Edmund I'm interested in directing. But it's just like how the body works. And then, you know, we have Marnie, who, you know, her resonators are like way up in here, you know, almost Fran Drescher level like resonators. Not the annoying nasal voice, but you know, she's got all the buzzing up here, and so she's got to kind of do the reverse. But we're hearing where people's voices naturally live, and as they, I guess, drop into the original pronunciation.
Yeah, that's another thing is just like, I mean, you can see it in videos of Ben Crystal explaining original pronunciation, how it changes your resonators, how it'll change your posture even.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't wait to see this on stage, because, you know, knowing some of the actors, knowing what they've done before, and now being able to see them tackling this is just going to be just fascinating.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited too. When Sean originally scheduled this, the run through was supposed to be yesterday, but a hurricane happened a little bit ago, and so that threw off the schedule just enough that I don't get to see a run through until Monday. But we're in a good spot. The show's in a really good spot. What else do we want to talk about? Anybody? Or more OP? Yeah, Beth.
I have a quickie question. Say, for instance, do you go to schools and maybe have somebody who spoke in OP would sound or feel like when they suddenly started hearing us now in present English, how they might think of what we were doing? Because how the language would change for them. Would they be able to understand us?
That's a really good question. And I don't know that we've done that specifically for original pronunciation, for going into schools to show them what that's like. And of course, we don't have anybody that's like a native, you know, 1600s Stratford-upon-Avon or London person. So we don't know what they would have heard if they were hearing our modern English. However, there is a place near Maryland called Smith Island, where, to all accounts, the way that they talk every day normally between themselves is very close to what some people say original pronunciation would have been like. So it would be interesting to hear them have one of them come to one of our productions in original pronunciation and just go, oh, they just talk like this, you know, or like have them say, oh, you all got that wrong or something. I don't.
Well, it'd also be fun because, like, say, for instance, even having a student figure out somebody that was speaking a form of English from maybe the 1300s, trying to understand somebody from the 1600s. What are they saying? Because, you know, you're just going crazy going, what is that word they've included in everything?
Yeah, I have a feeling that happens to a lot of audience members sometimes, but it's, you know, I mean, for me, I just move on with it. And I think it's fun. I think it's a great experience for audience members to come in, hear the original pronunciation, hear how it makes everything different, and all of a sudden go, oh, wait, that rhymed? How did that rhyme? Oh my God. So it's fun to be an audience member. It's also fun to be a part of it. So I'm really glad that BSF does this.
Yeah, it's been really thrilling to do. And beyond just the rhyme, you know, some of the things like how lightly they treat, you know, articles or prepositions compared to how we do as, those are cards. They, you know, some of the more difficult things when you're using an American accent or even an English accent in a contemporary English accent, when you are doing Shakespeare, some of the harder things to figure out, like how to say properly in OP, it just solves itself.
So that's okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and start, unless somebody else has something that they want to bring up. I was going to go into maybe the history of, or this is almost a little bit of dramaturgy, and the history of King Lear as he originally was, the original myth, and how Shakespeare adapted that myth into his play and what the differences are. I don't know how much of that you um, researched or how much you brought to the cast so that they would know here's where this story comes from, and if that affected your directing or the story that you're telling.
Yeah, I mean, so Lear is like a really far back British king, right? Pre-Arthurian. There's actually even a line in the play where the fool says, "This prophecy will Merlin make because I lived before his time." And Shakespeare. So
I think the actual the actual Britain King Lear was like 400s.
400s is, yeah, feels about right. Yeah. So post Romans, but pre Normans, and so like quite frankly, we did not get into much of the historical Lear because the historical Lear doesn't really show up all that much in the actual play, and is so kind of shrouded in fuzzy myth. What we did focus more on is what the Elizabethans' notion of the historical Lear was, and so there's a great interest in this time in Shakespeare's plays and plays of his contemporaries, where they're going back before the history plays, and they're doing Cymbeline, they're doing they're doing Lear, they're doing these plays about Great Britain because they have this new king, James, who is a Scottish king coming in, and they're actively going through the unification of England and of Britain in the precise time that Shakespeare is living and writing. So they start all of a sudden talking about Britain and a whole awful lot, not really talking about England very much at all. And so there's a kind of received notion that the division of the kingdoms between the three daughters are England, Scotland, and Wales, right? And that's the split. And so Shakespeare is definitely latching on to this idea of, look how bad it is when we're split up. Look what a great tragedy it is when we're split up. And so we've talked about that in rehearsal. We've worked on that in rehearsal. And then we've also spent some time in talking about how the play ends in its various versions, right? There's a lot of criticism of the Nahum Tate Lear, which, don't knock until you've tried it. It's really good. But it's the quote unquote happy ending Lear, which was performed from about 1680 to about 1870 before people suddenly refound Shakespeare's version. But the Nahum Tate version, one, is far better than people give it credit for, and two, it actually is drawing more on Shakespeare's sources than Shakespeare was. So the Lear story traditionally ends with Cordelia alive and marrying Edgar, and they go on to rule England. And Lear still dies. There's still much sadness, but like the good kids live, and the good kids go on leading. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about like the audience expectation of a happy ending Lear that the original audience would have had, and then seeing how, again, especially in the folio version of the play, which we're doing, the play is really driving towards a happy ending almost until the very end. Like, the daughters die, the young man comes back and he saves his father and he kills his evil brother, and the sisters are undone by their wickedness, and the guy is blinded, and that's terrible, but then he finds himself and he finds his son and he sees what he's been missing through his blindness, and all these great like morality play things. up until and we know it's the tragedy of Lear, so we know Lear is going to die, but there's a working towards England will be okay. England will get through this, and we will be a unified place. And in our printing of the play, it's the last page and a half that suddenly it turns very hard into a tragedy. And so Shakespeare not only is like just writing for an audience that expects the play to end happily, but he's actively encouraging them to be thinking of this play as one that's going to end okay, right up until the point that it doesn't, which is something that I love. And so that's more where we've tied the like historical Lear into it, but not so much into the like costuming of it or talking about who was Lear. Right? I haven't done
Christopher, you had something you wanted to add or request.
So request really. So I didn't know there were two possible endings, one bleaker than the other to Lear. It seems pretty bleak as it is. So could you talk just a little bit more about what the less bleak, I guess, would be the
version? So the differences are subtle, but in the quarto version of the play, Edgar is far more present throughout the entire play. And Edgar is the quote unquote good son of the like subplot. But he's less he's less sorry, one second. He's in the folio version, in the bleaker version, he is kind of ambiguous. He has good things that he does, and he has some bad things that he does, and like he kind of lets his father on for a bit longer, like letting him think that he's going to kill himself and things like that. Whereas in the quarto version, Edgar's like constantly checking in and saying, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know that this might seem bad, but here's why it's good. So for one, we get a sense at the end of the play when it's Edgar and Albany who are left as like the potential rulers of England, that the kingdom is in good hands because Albany has been set up as a decent guy in both versions of the play, and Edgar is set up as a very decent guy, and it seems like they're going to end up together. In the folio version, it seems like Albany is not going to help. Albany is piecing on out of here, and Edgar is not such a good guy. He's fine. He's way better than his brother, but he's not like the hero that he is in the quarto version. So there's not so much of a sense at the end of the folio version that everything's going to be okay, and that the kingdom is in good hands. It's like, well, you're still standing, why not you? Right? It's kind of end of Game of Thrones, like, okay, you're the last one alive, sure.
Yeah, you can get this sense, right, that Edgar, why is he continuing to torture his father like this, right?
Right.
I guess that's
and there's a line in the quarto that's like, I'm going to save him. I'm going to use his despair to save him from his own despair. Like, I'm paraphrasing Shakespeare, who said it better than I just did. But he offers an explanation in the quarto version that he does not offer in the folio.
So just one more question. Does he give the same little speech at the end in the both versions about how, the old people have really suffered and,
the speech is in both versions, but who says it changes. So in the folio, it's Edgar. In the quarto, it's Albany. Albany being the husband of Goneril, and the kind of like last son-in-law standing, who is presented throughout the play as a very decent guy. And I've played him, so I like him a lot. Anyway, I'm Team Albany, but he by giving Albany the last line, Shakespeare keeps both Albany and Edgar on stage together and implies a reunified Britain. By giving the last line to Edgar, Albany's last line becomes like, "I'm retiring, I'm out, I'm not doing this."
Right, like, I just can't take anymore. You do it.
Right. Yeah, and you're not really left with the sense that, you know, this guy who's been hiding out dressed as a madman for half the play is really equipped to rule a nation with any sort of competence.
That's awesome. So if anybody else has anything that they want to ask or check on, go ahead, Beth, because I do have one thing I do want to touch on about casting and doubling.
I just have a quickie question. Because there is a difference, is there any chance that Shakespeare was encouraged by one of the Cecils, either William or Robert, or even Walsingham himself, to make a change in the script for reasons we have no idea why?
It's certainly possible. I don't know anything about the Cecils, but regardless of the biographical reason why Shakespeare may have rewritten it, it's definitely clear that he deliberately did rewrite it. And some of his earlier plays that we have multiple versions of, like the history plays, it's pretty clear that he was a young journeyman when he wrote them, you know, bit player, sort of writing for one company, and then that company goes defunct, and he has to rewrite them for the new company that they're starting because they were pissed.
Okay.
I mean, we just don't know enough about his actual life to know the specific reason or source. If you know something about the Cecils that you want to share, I'd love to learn. I don't know anything about them.
Check them out. Just check them out. I mean, they had a lot of influence with Her Majesty and later with His Majesty.
Cool. Yeah, I will check them out. Thank you for that. Thank you for the recommendation.
So one of the things that I know that this production does, which is not something a lot of productions do, I think the latest one to do so was the one with, I can't remember the actress name now, but there's a dub that one of the things BSF does is casting and doubling of roles, and one of the ones that is happening in this one is Cordelia and the Fool are played by the same actor, which was one of the things that they suspected was actually something done in Shakespeare's time. And sometimes you'll see, you know, a very old man as old as Lear being cast as the Fool, but in this one it's the same person playing Cordelia. Do you have any information on the making that choice? Were you just going with the same casting that was originally done for the production from a year and a half ago when it was originally decided on, or and how is that going as far as like making the Fool a much younger person? How has that been going?
Yeah, no, fantastic question, and something I'm really excited to talk about, because I actually didn't know until after I had cast the show that that's how it had been done, you know, pre-COVID. So you need help? So I am a big fan of the idea that it was done this way, and it's because anytime you see a major character like the Fool or like Cordelia just show up or just leave, and then they just happen to be gone the exact amount of time that another character has been in. You'll forgive me another history's reference, but in 2 Henry VI, the character of Warwick, who's a huge role, hugely important role over the entire canon, suddenly disappears without explanation for an act and a half right when Jack Cade is on. And it's just like, oh, okay, so so part of it is just that it so cleanly is like the Fool comes in without really any explanation. We know where Cordelia is, and the Fool leaves actually with no explanation at all. There's no reason given at any point in the play why the Fool leaves. So directors always have to answer the question, you know, why does the Fool leave? And so that's always a flag to me that like that's probably something Shakespeare did intentionally. And then there's also the right when Cordelia dies and she's hanged, spoiler alert, sorry, as you know, like Kent is revealing that he's been secretly with him the whole time. So right when Cordelia dies and is hanged, Lear has this line, "My poor fool is hanged," right? And that's a line that a lot of people who want to be more interventionist than I do, like literally have Cordelia disguise herself as the fool, right? Which is definitely like not a thing that I'm doing, but a lot of directors have used that line as permission to do that. But as far as the part being played by a younger person, one of the things that I really am interested in with this play is how immature the old characters are, right? And how kind of foolish the old characters are. And there's like really bad communication between the generations. So having this one young person who's actually able to just look at the older person and say, "You're being an idiot," over and over and over again, has been great. And then like fully on the like practical side of everything, the COVID side of everything, I had a conversation with David, who's playing Lear, and Abby, who's playing the Fool and Cordelia. And I was like, look, you know, because of what the death scene calls for, you know, one, I'm going to ask you two to be super responsible in your life for the next couple of months. And also like, you two are going to be close to each other for a while. Can we just give ourselves permission that you two can be close to each other throughout the play? And so having that permission with the Fool as well as with Cordelia has been really helpful for getting a lot of those like iconic moments of like Lear out in the storm and the Fool clutching to him and things like that we couldn't do in COVID time if we didn't have like specific permission with those two actors to like get close to each other, since they would need to be. So that's been super beneficial as well.
Yeah, it's been interesting watching a few other productions where people take the poor fool is hanged and they'll do a hanging scene for the fool, or and instead of referencing, "Oh no, the poor fool, your daughter Cordelia has been hanged," and it's really interesting to see the different interpretations of that, and where they also put the fool in the last prophecy he makes, and
right,
everything that you know, how people tend to recut these things. So I'm am glad you're making strong decisions for good reasons.
I do my best.
This is we're coming up on about 10 minutes from 8. So if anybody has anything else they wanted to add, ask, or hope for, unless you have something you want to wrap this up with, Marshall.
No, I just really hope that I see you all at the shows. And I might have to call it short because I have full on tantrum going. So
okay.
Thank you all for coming. It's so happy to see you all. But I'm gonna have to bounce out. So have a lovely evening, and I'll see you all at the show.
We'll see everybody later. Thank you so much.
Aloha.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.